Hey, Gracebased families. This is Megan Hunt. I'm here co-hosting this podcast for the next 8 episodes with Cody Kimmel, and we're talking about what grace-based parenting looks like in action. We're talking about connection and correcting our kids. I'm a mom of 6 myself. I'm from Ruston, Louisiana, and I'm a first grade teacher, a foster mom, and I'm a practitioner of TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. And all those things kind of help me to be able to figure out what parenting really looks like in times where kids are not obeying, we're frustrated, we're overwhelmed. What does grace-based families really look like in action? So if you identify with me in any of those ways, you need to listen to these episodes because they're going to give you a lot of hope and a lot of practical tools for parenting your kids with grace.
Welcome to the Gracebased Podcast. I'm so excited for this conversation. Just for our listeners, my name is Cody Kimmel. I am the Executive Director of Gracebased, and I'm here with my friend, Megan Hunt. I'm just really glad you're here. We've known each other for a while. You've been kind of connected to Gracebased for a long time, but you also have a ton of wisdom to share with us. Why don't we just start by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
I'd love to. I'm so glad to be here. Gracebased is near and dear to my heart because Gracebased was kind of, as I was a young mom, that's one of the kind of grounding philosophies that taught me how to be a mom. So I feel very indebted to the message of raising my kids with grace. So I am, like I said, a mom. I have 6 kids. I'm married to my husband, Logan, and we live in a small town called Ruston, Louisiana, that is right on I-20 in North Louisiana. I'm originally from Scottsdale. That's how we know each other. Yep. And so I kind of wear a lot of hats. I'm a first grade teacher. I'm a foster mom. And primarily I work with an organization called The Well that's a nonprofit. And we work with foster and adoptive families and any family that's walking through parenting kids who come from hard places. So I get to do a lot of family coaching with that. And I'm also a TBRI practitioner. So trust-based relational intervention is a model out of TCU, where I'm a proud alum, that teaches us how to interact and engage with children or anybody that's experienced trauma. So that's kind of the lens that I come from parenting with. And a lot of kind of what I do just really aligns with grace-based. So it's a natural kind of
Well, and that's why, when we've talked in the past, you shared about what you're doing, it just made sense. Like, let's help parents kind of connect the dots. And what I love about the conversations that we're going to have, and we're going to be able to do a number of podcasts, and you can listen to kind of all of these together, we get to connect the dots between how a lot of the skills that you've learned through TBRI and just your experience, it's really practical, obviously, for parents who have kids in their homes who have experienced high levels of trauma, or caregivers or educators or anybody like that who is working with kids regularly with trauma. What I love about what you do and how you've talked about it, it's really helpful for all parents. Like as you have shared what you do and some of the wisdom that you've gained, I'm looking at my life and I'm looking at my kids and I'm like, man, this is just gold for, I think, any parent. So I am very excited for you to be here, sharing what you're doing.
Thank you. I think I kind of came to this place because I needed some more support as I was trying to pursue parenting my kids with grace, and TBRI and all of those just kind of were the boots on the ground strategies for me to use. And so it makes a lot of sense, and I'm excited that we are going to have some of these conversations today too.
Well, I wonder if maybe before we even get into the specific conversation for this episode, can you just define what TBRI is? Because even when you first said it, I had to quickly Google it and look it up. And I know what TBRI is, and do the whole thing. So can you just give a brief summary of what TBRI is? And
sure. So TBRI stands for Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And it's a model that was developed by Doctors Karen Purvis and David Cross out of TCU. Okay. And that's where I first really learned about it. I mean, I was a foster parent from the time I was young. I became a foster mom, a single mom at 23, right out of college. I went to TCU. So I had heard about this model before. And so it really, I kind of gravitated toward it as I was learning to parent. But what it is it's evidence-based, research-based model that focuses on relationships as a means for healing. And so it talks about that trauma that was experienced in the context of relationships needs to be healed in the context of relationships. And so it really makes a lot of sense, and it just goes right along with the gospel and what we know about God's heart for parenting. And so what is great for I guess maybe what's essential for kids who have experienced trauma is excellent for all kids. So my first experiences with parenting were foster parenting. So kind of like a really high level of correcting and disciplining was really important. But I realized as I learned some of those skills, and then I went on to parent my biological kids who maybe didn't have the same levels of trauma as my first kids, those skills really still worked. And it really allowed me to parent with grace a lot easier. And so I kind of learned that what was essential for my first ones actually is still the framework and the model that I used today.
Oh, totally. Well, one of the things that I love about that model and that idea is how biblically rooted it is. When you look at even the language of adoption in the Bible, of how we have been adopted kind of out of the family of Adam, out of this family of sin and brokenness and into the family of God, into the family of Jesus. It really matches up with that idea of, well, it's broken in these relationships, it's healed in this new relationship that we have in him. And so there's so much, I think, crossover between what we have talked about and what we've spent time talking about through this podcast and other resources that we have, and your experience and particularly your expertise there. For this particular one, and I love that we're starting at this one because it's where we oftentimes have to start. We can only kind of give to our kids what we've allowed in ourselves. And you've talked about this before.
Yeah, we can only lead our kids to a place that we've been ourselves.
Yeah. And even like the core of the grace-based message is we are parenting our kids the way God treats his own kids. And for us to be able to do that, we have to understand who we are in him, how we are as his children. So let's kind of start with that. Where do we begin as parents in understanding our role, and how does our own childhood basically shape our parenting now?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think back about how you were raised as a child and really think about, if you think about your patterns as a parent, how many of those are either directly in line with what you experienced or are directly in contrast to what you experienced. A lot of times we do what was modeled for us, right? So
Good or bad.
Good or bad. And a lot of times if we had a negative experience, we tend to say, well, I'm not going to do that. But a lot of times where our childhood experiences fall short is if we didn't have a model to follow, right? If I'm like, well, I'm not going to do it this way, but what am I going to do? I know I want to follow the Lord's heart for parenting, but what does that even look like? And I think, like we were talking about before, you can't lead a child to a place that you haven't been yourself. So when we look back at our own childhoods, we have to acknowledge what we did get and what we didn't get, and what kind of relationship we had with our parents and our caregivers, acknowledging that we know our parents are not perfect, that they did the very best that they could, and that God is using our childhoods as part of the story that he's writing for us. He's doing that for our own children too. But knowing that a lot of those patterns are set in place, and without mindfulness in changing some of those might be playing out in our own relationships with our own kids unknowingly.
Oh, totally.
If we're not attending to that.
And I think that's where, as you've taught about even kind of attachment and that reality of our own upbringing, I think it's easy to look at like overt trauma or overt things like that. But where I've seen, I think, a lot of the power in what you have talked about is there's subtle things that have happened, and maybe things that maybe on the surface don't even come across as overtly bad, that can still form some of these patterns and form and shift and change some of that. So maybe what could be helpful is, in understanding how this affected us, talk a little bit about what those attachment styles are. What are we looking at? What's kind of a general understanding of that?
Sure. One thing about TBRI is it is an attachment-based theory. And so talking about attachment is the connection that a child has with their caregiver in order to get their needs met. So we don't think about it, but over and over again, when we're caring for a child, they have a need that's expressed. And then as a parent, we meet that need. And what that does in our bodies and in our brains is just phenomenal. It really is just biologically amazing. The way that neurotransmitters are, kind of expressed and then inhibited when we have a need that's met by a caregiver, it creates almost like a cycle.
Yeah.
So again and again, that child is learning to trust their caregiver. They're learning, if I need something, my mom and dad will help me. If I'm hungry, my mom or dad will feed me. And so thousands of times that plays over and builds a framework of trust for a child. When that attachment cycle is not met all the way, or it's not met in a specific way, it can change the way that the brain functions. And so children who have experienced trauma in childhood, a lot of times it's a broken attachment cycle. So maybe they cried and nobody came.
Yeah.
And so eventually their body and their brain learns that an adult is not here to meet my need. And that can be with physical needs and with emotional needs as well, because we know as humans we're complex and we're built for relationships. And so it isn't just my mom, Molly, always had food. So based on our relationships with our primary caregiver when we were very young, before 12 months of age, those patterns are set into place. And the great news is that our brains are plastic and that those pathways are not permanent forever,
Right.
that we can change the attachment style that we kind of began with, but it takes some intentionality.
Yeah.
So the ideal attachment style is a secure attachment.
Right.
And that's somebody whose emotional and physical needs were consistently met by a caring caregiver.
Yeah.
And so that's the ideal. And that
Mm-hmm.
develops somebody who can trust and who can be in a thinking place, use their brain and their body in effective ways to meet their needs throughout their life. Another attachment style that's less than ideal is the dismissive attachment style. And so that child might have had all their physical needs met, but maybe their emotional needs weren't met.
Yeah.
Okay. And that might be as little as like, oh, I cut my finger, and a mom or dad saying like, you're fine.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I can say I experienced my fair share of that. I had phenomenal parents.
Yeah.
But depending on how you were raised, so, if I cut my finger now, you know what I'm probably going to say? I'm fine.
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
going to
Yeah,
dwell
yeah.
on it a lot, because that's kind of what I learned. Like,
Yeah.
I need to just manage that pain or even that fear. Like, I can be kind of tough and brave. Another type of attachment style is entangled. And that is when the physical or emotional needs were inconsistently met. So that might mean that sometimes your parents were there to meet your needs, and sometimes they weren't. And that could be the result of parents that were traveling for work, or maybe there was a divorce in the family and you lived with different people. Maybe there was a substance abuse problem or something significant that was going on that made it there were sometimes your parents were available and sometimes they weren't.
Yeah.
And so what that can tend to do for children who grow into adults can really cause them to either get too close or really push away from others in relationships. So, and then the fourth type is disorganized. And that is somebody who really has experienced a significant amount of trauma that their patterns of attaching to other people haven't been formed into a pattern.
Right.
And so when we think about, you can dive really deep into attachment. So if this is like really interesting to you, like it is for me, you can really dive deep into attachment to kind of explore what you are and what kind of attachment style that you currently have. But I think as we think about our own parenting that we experience, and then we think of how we're parenting our kids, some of those patterns emerge, and they're kind of surprising sometimes when you realize like, oh, my parents didn't give me a Band-Aid when I got hurt, and here I am telling my own kids, well, should I call the ambulance? Should we cut off your arm? That kind of thing. Yeah. And you can see those patterns kind of emerge. And that really, when our goal with our parenting is to connect with our kids and correct them and point them towards the heart of God and point them towards developing their character, we know that we want to promote a strong connection with our kids. And sometimes those different attachment styles can disrupt our connection with our kids. And that's why it's so important to be mindful about them.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I wonder for me, when I became a parent, and I'm sure this experience across the board with parents, you realize things about yourself, both like in some ways good things, like there's a self-sacrifice maybe that you dig deep into. There's a lot of love and deep, beautiful things that can come out of becoming a parent. But man, your junk gets exposed
It's
really
sanctifying,
quickly.
Yeah.
Between the sleeplessness and the fact that you have a human being that you can't control, that really does not want to do what you want them to do most of the time. You have all that stuff and it brings it out. And so a part of me wonders if some of this stuff, is particularly if it's maybe a little more subtle, or you've learned to cope maybe in a negative way that's not overtly apparent.
Mhm.
When you become a parent,
Yeah.
it really starts to come out, especially in how you do with your
That's
kids.
right. And a lot of times you don't like what you see. And
Oh, yeah.
that's what
No,
I
no, no.
found for myself
Oh.
is that I realize, oh, wow, that pattern in me is not pointing me in the direction that I want to go as a parent.
Yeah.
It's not pretty and it's really not productive. It's not helping me at all. But I realize that a lot of those are deep rooted in kind of who I am and what I believe about myself. And so going back and doing some of my own digging and own work really helps me to be able to be more effective with my kids. And kind of the goal is to move towards a secure attachment with our kids where they know and believe 100% that my parents are here to meet my physical needs. Yes, their bodies are going to be present, but also they're here to meet my emotional and spiritual needs and that they're here for me. And I want everything that I'm doing in my parenting to support that fact.
Well, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast about kind of the house model that we have with Gracebased, where the foundation is really how do we meet those core needs that we have. And probably the most significant one of those is that idea of the secure love. And in some ways, like we know that Jesus is the one who models secure love perfectly. And we as parents kind of get to be the proxy of that in our kids' lives oftentimes. So I have a few questions to follow up with that. But the first, you've talked about how you need to address that and you've had to address that in your own life. So I'm wondering, even just from a practical standpoint, what does that look like? Before we can really give to our kids what they need and to kind of reshape and maybe change some of the patterns that have informed our own life, what's a practical way to do that? Like how have you gone about doing that?
The two things that we need to do, first of all, is just take an honest stock of where we came from and what things that we're bringing to the table. Think about our relationships with our parents. Were my needs met? And to say honestly that if they weren't, my parents love me.
Yeah.
They are doing the best that they can, and that God is a healer and restorer of those things, and to be honest with ourselves. And then also to take stock of what lies am I believing that need to be replaced with truth that will allow me to securely attach and trust other people. And sometimes our lack of attachment or our lack of secure attachment is just rooted in lies that we've believed, whether it's I'm too much, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not important. All those things, if we have some of those lies that are deeply rooted in what we believe about ourselves, it's going to be very hard to convince our children otherwise, right? If I'm believing the lie, I'm too much, then it's going to be really hard for me to convince a child who thinks the same thing. No, you're not too much. So we have to internalize that truth for ourselves. And the quickest way for me to do that, honestly, is looking at the pain points in my parenting. Is to look at like, where am I really not doing well? Where have I fallen apart? Where have I screamed? Where have I just lost it? Where do I feel completely ill-equipped? And then work backwards from there. Okay, why did I respond like that? Is this a pattern? Who have I seen respond like this? How did my parents respond to me when I was young? Think about the things that you have had modeled to you and some of those patterns. And then I just honestly started writing them down and asking God, praying over them and saying, God, help me figure this out. This is too hard for me. I can't fix this on my own. And the Lord has in my life been very gracious to show me the ways that I have not been clinging to real truth, and that how that has really impacted the kind of mom I am to my kids.
Well, I love how you it comes out in those pain points. Like I think of like, when am I overwhelmed as a parent, or when am I too quick to react or lose it, or any of those things? Having the wherewithal to take those as symptoms of a deeper problem of, it's not just like, hey, I need to grit through this and become more patient. These are oftentimes just think of like, if you bump your knee on something, there's a pain there, and you can ignore it, or you can ask the question, I wonder why my leg's hurting right now. It's kind of those same things. So it's almost like recognizing, okay, what is it that consistently sets me off, or what is it that consistently maybe sends me into a spiral? It's not always in anger. I think what sends me into dysregulation or things like that.
Yeah.
and then asking those questions. And
Yeah.
I think that's so smart.
And, a resource, if you're interested or if anybody's interested in digging deeper into that, there's the Pearl Project has something called Making Sense of Your Worth that is fantastic.
Okay.
And it's a way it's just a pathway to be able to become what they call earned secure. So that earned secure is neat because you're having to do your own work to get there. So that's a resource that is really neat, that is TBRI aligned, that is fantastic for supporting an adult on their pathway to becoming earned secure.
Oh, no, I love that. So I love the term earn secure because I think it points to, I think what can be easy to happen, even in a conversation like this, we start to inspect ourselves and think my own parent attachment style, what happened to me as a kid, whatever, start looking through that and just starts getting hopeless. Like, oh man, I'm dismissive or I'm disorganized or any of these other things. Or even without that language, we look at it and say like, what was modeled to me is not how I want to live my life. I think you can start to feel this hopelessness set in. Like, how will I ever get past this? How will I ever get through this? And you use that term earn secure because that's kind of the goal. And part of it is like recognizing, I don't think any human being has a fully secure attachment coming into adulthood. You can have the best parents in the world. Everybody has some level of brokenness. And that's not to say that there's not a range of it and that the ranges don't need to be treated differently and addressed differently, but nobody's coming into it fully modeled in their lives. And so what is that process of earn secure? Because I think if we're going to give that to our kids ultimately and model that to our kids, we also have to have a goal in our life of seeking that healing. So what does that look like?
Okay, so TBRI teaches that there are 4 components to a healthy adult. How would you look at an adult and know that they are secure? So the first one is the ability to give care and the ability to receive care. So that makes a lot of sense, right? If I can meet somebody's needs and if I can receive help from somebody, those are 2 of them. If I can be my autonomous self, that means like I can make my own decisions and I'm okay by myself. I'm okay in a group. And the last one is being able to negotiate for my needs. So being able to say what I need. So as we think about those things as yourself, like as an adult, there's usually 1 or 2 of those that you're like, okay, I'm not good at that. So a lot of times, depending on your personality type, you might be really good at meeting other people's needs. You're doing all the things, but it's hard for you to ask for help or receive help. That is one that's really easy to spot. Like, okay, that's kind of one of those characteristics of a secure adult that I need to work on. Being an autonomous self, I think about like if you were in a room and they were like, okay, everybody vote for like what movie you want to watch. And everyone votes for one. And then you're like, I want to vote for the other one, but I'd be the only one. Somebody who's a secure adult, has secure attachment would be like, yeah, I'll be the only one voting for that thing. I'm totally okay being on my own. I don't have to be kind of codependent on what somebody else is doing or thinking. And then the last one is being able to negotiate for your needs and being able to say, this is what I need. So as a mom, for me, negotiating my needs a lot of times looks like saying to my husband, like, I need some alone time. I have got to go to the grocery store by myself. So that might be an example of me negotiating what I need, where he might say, why don't you take the kids to the grocery store? And if I was not secure, I might be saying like, okay, even though I'm like, oh, but being able to negotiate your needs says like, no, this is actually what I need. I need alone time right now. So those 4 things, giving care, receiving care, being your autonomous self, and negotiating for your own needs are the 4 indicators of secure adults. So those to me are like really good. I'm a checklist person.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I can
Man,
identify
I feel like I've got
those.
some work to do. That's
But at least you know which direction to go.
Well, no, it's great. Yeah. And so in doing that, one of the things you talk about like is this plasticity in your brain. And how oftentimes things that are broken in relationship are then healed through relationship.
That's right. Yeah.
And so at a practical level, what can that look like? I think for me, I've got 4 kids. I know you have 6 kids. We're so busy in our lives. And the thought of doing anything beyond just the bare minimum to survive sometimes can feel like a lot. But obviously, there is a healthiness to leaning into relationships, leaning into other things. So like, I guess for you, because I mean, I have 4 kids, but you have 6 kids, and so you win. Like you won.
Definitely
Like
not a
all that stuff.
contest.
Yeah,
All
but
the
no,
kids will
but
take
let's say it's a
all
little
you
bit of a
got.
contest, and you won. But how have you been able to carve out the time to have the kinds of relationships that you need to heal those things? What can that look like? What does that look like for you? How have you seen that with other parents?
Yeah. I think a lot of it honestly begins in our quiet reflection time with the Lord. If you're a believer in Jesus, I think that we believe that God is the shaper of our hearts and that He will mold and change us and that He hears us when we pray. And so that's where I honestly start, is identifying one of those areas in my life and saying, like, God, I really need help. I really need help with being able to like receive care from other people and receive help, and asking Him to please shape me, give me opportunities to practice. And then starting small, just choosing one thing rather than saying like, well, I got none of those. I'm bad at everything.
Yeah.
Be able to say, okay, I'm going to work on this one thing and this is what it looks like. And maybe if it is, let's say, receiving care, maybe that's when my husband says, like, can I help Carlisle with her homework? I'm thinking to myself, you do not know how to do 5th grade math. I will help her with the homework.
Yeah.
But saying like, actually, yeah,
Go for it.
thank you.
Yeah.
And just saying like, okay, when he offers to help me, I'm going to say yes. And not only does that, what that does is, right, it reinforces my trust with my husband that like he's going to take care of that need. And ultimately, me not being able to receive care is rooted in the belief that like you're not really going to do it. Right. That's how it comes back to attachment.
Exactly.
Not being able to give care to somebody is a lot of times because it wasn't modeled for you and you don't really know how to see that somebody is hurting. So I think picking one thing and then just practicing it consistently, because our brains are plastic and they learn through repetition. So the synaptic pathways in our brain, that's a big word, kind of just remind me of like a dog running in a path through the woods. Like they get deeper and stronger the more we use them. And so the more we practice something, the more it is ingrained in our brain and the more likely that our brain is going to run down that pathway. And so the more that we practice any of these characteristics, the more it will become second nature to us. And so those are really my 2 suggestions. Ask God to help you and pick something and do it again and again. And then eventually I think it will be part of your character and you will realize like, okay, now I might be ready to work on another thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So St. Augustine would talk about how it was a bit of a joke, but also like deeply rooted in his own approach to how spiritual formation happens, where it's kind of the heart follows the stomach. And it was the way of talking about it, where if you start by saying, I want to have a new desire or form a new like way of living or understanding my life or something like that, I just kind of need to maybe think about it a lot, or like I just need to wait for that inspiration to happen or wait for that heart change to happen. And his whole thing was like, if you want your heart to change, your body needs to go first, essentially. Like your physical thing needs to go first. So what I love about what you're saying is it gives a real practical reality that we can practice these things even if we don't feel like we're in it, even if we don't feel like this is really, I don't believe this about myself yet, or I'm really uncomfortable in this. You can practice it. And the beautiful way that God made us is as we practice it, our heart can change too. Our idea about ourselves can change too. And we get to be in a better place to give what God has given us through his grace to the people around us, not just our kids, but to everybody
That's right.
around
It
us.
changes who you are to all the people that you're in relationship with, not just your children, but everyone. And I really believe in finding a scripture that you can just meditate on and continue to choose and saying, this is God's word. This is his truth for me. And I can continue, like you said, to act in this truth, even if I don't feel it, even if it doesn't feel true. I believe that it is true. And so I'm going to walk in that.
One of my favorite scriptures that I will repeat over and over again is from Psalm 119, where it just says, Lord, I am yours, save me. And oftentimes, as a parent, I have been in that place so many times where I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to help this kid. I don't know how to help myself. I know that I'm probably just as much the problem in this scenario as my children are. And you get to that point where you can just kind of start there. And what I love about those types of prayers and that type of relationship is God will actually meet you in those moments and bring you through.
I
And
have had
so,
so many of those moments in my life
yeah,
where I'm like, I don't know what to do, but I know I don't know how to do it. Like,
yeah,
you're going to have to do this. And
yeah,
I think when we get to that place of vulnerability with the Lord and with ourselves,
yeah,
that's when we really do see Him intervene and Him change us
yeah,
as the conduit to help change our children, right?
yeah,
As parents, it is a huge job that requires the changing and formation of ourselves more than it does
yeah.
our children. And a lot of times we think of it's something I'm doing to my children, but I think parenting is something that God is doing through us and He is shaping us as
Oh,
we
yeah.
move through.
This has been so good. And I think in summary, it's really, I hope what we hear, and I hope what, everybody listening hears is, for one, like, our relationship with the Lord matters to how we parent. Our understanding of our past matters to how we parent, and that nobody is beyond hope to heal. And I think that's the beauty of what it is, and it's interesting. My dad started this ministry 40 some years ago. And oftentimes what we will do as parents is we'll come to something like this and be like, okay, how do I fix my kids? Like, how do I change their behavior? How do I make them stop screaming in the grocery store, or, doing whatever it is that they're doing? How do we stop that? And always the beginning of that conversation is, you have to adapt and change and grow as a parent. Like, the change in your family kind of starts in your heart, not with your kids' hearts. And which in some ways is daunting, but it is, to me, I hope what we hear is that this is a beautiful invitation, that maybe, because I think a lot of us are coming to this with a lot of brokenness in our past, where there's a legitimate fear that the patterns that we grew up with are going to play out in our kids' lives, that despite all the attempts to break that habits, all that stuff, what I love about, and what I hope we hear, is that this is an invitation that God can heal that, and that there are real ways in which God can heal that and bring you into new life. And so,
And even if brokenness has already happened and it's already influencing your parenting, and even if you feel like you have done the worst and you are just not on the right track at all, there is still hope that the Lord can restore and return you to the path that He has for you.
yeah.
Hey, this is Greg from Pasadena, California. Gracebased make free resources for parents thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. To join in the work of transforming generations of families, go to gracebased.com/join.